Black people who were brought to this country were stripped of their names, language, culture, religion, God, and taken totally away from the history of themselves. Here are 30 million people who don't wear their own names, they wear your names. Who don't speak their own language, they speak English, which is not their language. They never were allowed their own cultural expression of Africa. Don't you realize that when you turn a people upside down and inside out, then sell them not for a day, not for a year, but for 300 years and deny us the human right to know, to read a book, to learn, to understand, and then after 300 years of that, you allow us into the church, but by that time, you've painted Jesus white, God white, the angels white, and then all these black people have been subjected to a form of white supremacy, which produces in the reverse a black inferiority.
Good morning, family. I hope you're doing fantastic, and it's a pleasure to have you here in my channel. Far too long, Black history has been buried, whitewashed, or completely erased from mainstream education. But something powerful is happening. People are waking up. In today's video, we are witnessing white people discovering the real, unfiltered truth about Black history. Stories that were hidden from them, and in many cases, from all of us. Their reactions are raw, honest, and eye-opening. Let's get to it. If you're new here, kindly consider subscribing so you don't miss any update from our videos.
Europeans didn't inherit history. They burned it. Not out of ignorance, but because they knew the truth would void the receipts. The truth would collapse the entire storyline. So they rewrote the narrative in powdered wigs, hiding genocides under Latin, and renaming every theft as discovery. This wasn't documentation. It was branding. Europeans didn't study other civilizations. They studied how to erase them and still pass the test. The moment they touched a library, it caught fire. Egypt, the Rosetta Stone was looted. The nose of the Sphinx was blown off. They stood over the ruins and declared Africa illiterate. India, Nalanda, one of the world's oldest universities, torched. 9 million manuscripts vanished. Then they published textbooks claiming Europe invented math. Mesoamerica, over 5,000 Maya codices burned in church bonfires, called satanic, and then centuries later, copied for European astronomy. Mali, Timbuktu had more written texts than all of medieval Europe, and France buried them in sand until African scholars smuggled them out in the dark to preserve their own knowledge from European archivists. This isn't history. This is a global arson scene, and the suspects kept the ashes. They didn't just erase, they rebranded. Algebra becomes Western math. Optics becomes Galileo's dream. Surgery, astronomy, navigation, pulled from Arabic, African, and Asian sources, stripped of origin, and resold in powdered French as the Enlightenment. They erased the Ethiopian roots of early Christianity, the Nubian queens who governed astronomical calendars, the zero-based logic of India, the land stewardship of the Haudenosaunee, the feminist inheritance of the Ibwa, and replaced it all with a montage of pale men thinking in cellars. They didn't progress. They plagiarized and pretended to be the source. The Renaissance wasn't a rebirth. It was a break-in. While Europe was still exercising women for having dreams, the Islamic world had hospitals, legal scholarship, chemistry labs, and academic peer review. And when Europe finally woke up, it did so by translating Arabic texts that had already preserved Greek, Indian, Persian, and African thought. Ibn Sina becomes a father of medicine with a Latin name. Ibn al-Haytham becomes a precursor to optics, even though his work predates Descartes by half a millennium. This wasn't a rediscovery. It was relay theft, with the baton of knowledge passed through fire, and then whitewashed mid-sprint. Even their maps lied. The Mercator projection stretches Europe, shrinks Africa, and centers the world around imperial delusion. The Middle East is only middle if Europe is the sun. Western civilization includes Australia and Canada, but not Ethiopia and Mexico, even though they had alphabets before Greek even existed. They called Africa tribal and forgot Europe was governed by inbred warlords in muddy castles with no plumbing. They called Haiti violent and named cities after Napoleon. They called indigenous science myth and European mythology canon. They stole bronze from Benin, called it art preservation, and then locked it behind glass and slapped a plaque on it that says gift. Stolen artifacts were labeled generous. Massacres were called missions. Human trafficking was called trade. This isn't historical confusion. It's weaponized curriculum. The lies are maintenance. The truth would collapse the floorboards. Because if the world knew that Europe industrialized slavery and called itself abolitionist, if they knew that democratic indigenous governments were destroyed to install monarchies and puppet regimes, if they knew that Europe's civilizing missions involved famine, sterilization, language erasure, museum theft, and state-engineered extinction campaigns, then there would be nothing left to claim. No moral ground, no myth of progress, just receipts written in blood and buried under their museums. This is why their timelines start with Plato and end with Churchill. Why every world history class skips from Greece to Galileo like nothing of value happened in those 2,000 years between, unless it was white and male and drawing triangles. Europe didn't document history. It hunted it and locked it in glass. It renamed it, and when we speak the truth out loud, we get banned from TikTok. But this isn't revision. This is restoration. We're not studying Europe. We're surviving its edits. Cope.
You cannot discover a place that already has people living there. To the guy who said Africa was discovered by Europeans, let me teach you something. You don't discover a place where millions of people already lived, traded, built kingdoms, and developed complex systems long before Europeans touched African soil. When Vasco da Gama arrived in 1497, he didn't find wilderness. He found cities. He found the Swahili coast, Kilwa, Mombasa, Mapungubwe, civilizations trading with India and China centuries earlier. Only thing Europe discovered was its own greed. You didn't discover Africa. You invaded it. You renamed it. You redrew the borders. You enslaved and colonized. That doesn't sound like discovery. It sounds like theft. Why do we still believe this lie? Because history is taught from the perspective of the thief, not the victim. And that is why your textbooks lie.
What if I told you everything you learned about slavery barely scratches the surface? There's a hidden history that's way bigger, darker, and closer to today than you might have thought. Slavery was global and ancient long before Europeans crossed the Atlantic. But what made the Atlantic slave trade so different was how it used race as a weapon and built an entire global economy on stolen lives. It wasn't just people enslaving people. It was a system designed to erase identities, cultures, and humanity itself. And here's the part that most never hear. The majority of enslaved Africans didn't go to the United States. They were shipped to South America and the Caribbean. Brazil alone imported 5 million Africans. The plantations out there were so brutal that you would work yourself to death, and it was cheaper to get a new slave than it was to keep one alive. They didn't just enslave people, they industrialized death. Meanwhile, in places like Britain, where slavery was abolished in 1833, guess who got paid? The slave owners, not those who were enslaved. The British government paid the equivalent of £17 billion to former slaveholders. Taxpayers, including descendants of enslaved people, only finished paying off that debt in 2015. 2015. But here's what they never highlight enough. Enslaved people didn't just suffer, they fought back. From day one, there were uprisings, escapes, secret communities, and entire cultures built on the back of defiance. In Haiti, enslaved Africans didn't just rebel, they won. They defeated France, Britain, and Spain, and founded the first free black republic in 1804. That revolution terrified every slave-owning nation on Earth. Slavery wasn't just some tragic mistake. It was the foundation for modern wealth, global capitalism, and the racial inequalities that we see today. If we don't learn about this hidden history, we don't understand the modern world that we live in today. And this story isn't over. We're still living in its shadow today.
Did you know that during the 17th and 18th centuries, wealthy Europeans liked to be painted alongside black enslaved children, as we can see here? As you know, during this period of time, black African children were trafficked from Africa to the West Indies to work on plantations with their parents. However, a number of these children were also selected to be sent back to Europe to be used as pets, essentially. It was seen as very fashionable by white Europeans to own black children who could be dressed up in fine clothes and basically wait on them like pages. And to be painted with one was the ultimate symbol of wealth and status, and that is why we have a number of them in these paintings, although generally their names and identities are not known. What's even more tragic is that most of them have got these collars on, a symbol of their enslavement. And most of them are boys, and these boys always have one pearl earring. The pearl earring signified that they were owned by someone of consequence and wealth, and that reflected well again upon the owner. These young boys, who usually below the age of 10, could be sold as soon as their owners got bored of them. And there are lots of adverts in contemporary newspapers selling these children. So, for example, in the Daily Post on the 26th of May, 1725, there's an advert for a, quote, "a beautiful Negro boy about 8 years of age, lately come from Barbados, to be disposed of," meaning to be sold. In these paintings, you'll always see these children doing some sort of menial task. This boy here is holding 2 dogs on leads, and this child here is carrying a basket of fruit for his mistress. But we also can't forget the fact that these children were also included in these paintings because it made the sitter look incredibly white. The juxtaposition between these poor enslaved children and their white owners was seen as very fashionable at the time. And in this painting particularly, everything is aimed at making this woman look as white as possible. And this is a trope seen again and again during these paintings. Interestingly, here we actually have a young girl. As I said, we don't generally see young black girls in these paintings, but we can see that she is also adorned with pearls and some other gems to basically draw the attention to the juxtaposition between the dark skin and the white pearls. Here we have another example. We have a young girl with a pearl necklace holding a shell filled with pearls. Sometimes the juxtaposition between the light and the dark is so ridiculous that the black children almost fade into the background. For example, this is particularly outrageous. Like, look at this child, almost falls into the background, except for his collar. Another thing I forgot to mention is that sometimes these black children were given as companions to white children. And you can see the absolute inequality here. I mean, this dog on the right is receiving more affection than the poor black child behind. Tragically, the identities of these children is almost lost to us, almost completely, because they were seen as property, and once the family had grown bored of them, they could be sold on or even returned to the plantations. And so to this day, these paintings remain the only evidence that they ever existed.
It's crazy to think how much of this history was kept from people. What you just saw is more than a reaction. It's a reckoning where truth is revealed. It challenges not just what we know, but how we see each other. The fact that so many people are just now learning about the revolutionary spirit of Black history speaks volume about the systems that shaped our understanding of the world. It's up to all of us to keep the conversation going, stay informed, and stay awake. This is Woken Africa, where truth is power. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's video. If you found value in what you shared, kindly consider subscribing and turn on notifications so you don't miss any update. Your support really means a lot, and it helps us keep bringing you more insightful content. Thanks again, and see you in the next one.